Roland's at 1099 Sunnydale.
Okay, right in the hood.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me see here.
So, Roland, you got the slideshow?
Yes, I do. Let me bring it up right now. How's that?
Yeah,
Perfecto.
thank you for putting that together. It's really great.
It's very short, so
We love it when it's short. Short and sweet. Open it up for questions if people have them.
right. So I'll go ahead and start now.
Okay.
Okay.
Welcome everybody, or for those of us that are here, if we can go on to the next one, the next page. So the what we're going to talk about is basically the arrival, the community that the Samoan community built here, and where are we at today. So the next slide, please. So the arrival, here are some pictures of individuals that first came out here. The one in the wedding dress is my mother, who was married here in San Francisco on Ocean Avenue at a Presbyterian church back in 1956. And then to the right, you have Joseph Alioto, who is being laid by then executive director in the 60s of Samoa, Mo Samoa, which is no longer here, but they did have an office out of the Bayview. Um, Below that is a television station in early 50s that was telecast. I think it was on KPIX here in Channel 5, where Samoans were introducing their traditional garb. And then next to that is a house that was in Daly City. It was one of the first known homes that a Samoan couple purchased. It is still there. It's near the Daly City BART station. And many Samoans who came in the 50s would come to this particular house to gather, to have meals, to talk about, the community. And there is where the Samoan Civic Association grew out of uh, there with Ernest Reed, who was married to my auntie Boiva Reed. So many Samoans in general started to leave the islands in the 40s and 50s, either through the military, as my father was in the Air Force, so that's how he was able to get off the island, as many of our men enlisted in the U.S. military. And as nationals, which we are, it was easier to travel back and forth to the United States as they did not require to have a visa, and this made connecting with families in Honolulu and the mainland much easier to travel back and forth and relocate, as many families shared spaces till other members were able to secure housing. I found this on the internet that in 2018, the estimated number of Samoans in San Francisco decreased actually, which was about 2,311, which did not account for people who reported to be what we call Afakasi or part Samoan. Next slide. Or can I change it? Housing. So when Samoans migrated to San Francisco in the late 40s and 50s, many lived in public housing here in Visitation Valley and the surrounding communities like Sunnydale, Candlestick Point, Hunters Point. This was the most affordable housing available before establishing themselves and moving to other communities in the Bay Area. And of course, in the Visitation area, Bob Wong, who was the owner of El Rancho Supermarket, here on the borderline of San Francisco and Daly City, between Viz Valley and Daly City, was a supermarket called El Rancho. My uncle Ernest Reed, who was the president of the Samoan Civic Association then, they were able to work together to bring island staples to El Rancho supermarket in the late 70s. So that's when a lot of the Samoans were able to get things like taro and taro leaves, coconut cream and oil. And of course, they frequented many of the outlining businesses such as Castle Lanes, Castle Bravo, which was the Russian House now, where some Samoans worked as security guards for the nightclub or waitresses or bartenders. And then, of course, other Samoan businesses that they would frequent, which grew on the Daly City side, which was the Samoan Luau and also Levy's Market. Some of the housing projects that you see here, of course, there's the infamous Eichler Towers or Geneva Towers, which it went down years ago, but many of my family lived there and were relocated. And when the towers came back, many of them did not return. So they liked where they were at. Some on the peninsula, some across the bay. They were given vouchers then to do Section 8, and very few families returned. But there are some families now that are living here in which they call the towers. Next slide. Or if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask as we're going along.
I remember El Rancho when it was at the dollar, where the Dollar Tree is now.
Right. So
That's
before that, they were across the street actually at where I think it's a Baptist church. That's where they kind of started. So then they went over to where it was, El Rancho, where a lot of people knew it as. And then they moved to the other side where there's this very large apartment complex. And then I think Kim Palace took over, and that was the last business there. Next slide. Places of worship and employment. So our Samoan community, they're very committed and they're very strong Christians. There were at least 5 places to worship within the Visitation Valley and Bayview districts back then. I think there are probably more. Many Samoan men worked at the Naval Shipyard in Hunters Point, which it was abbreviated as HPNSY, the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard. And after ceasing operations in 1974, they leased it out, the shipyard, and it actually, I think it closed around 1986, but I still had uncles who worked out there and who are still around today. They're in their 70s and 80s. And I believe there's a lawsuit that's been pending for many years that their unions, because many of them had cancer, and many families became infected with tumors and breast cancer. And of course, this is an ongoing issue of cleanup where the naval station was, and many of the Samoan community. As a matter of fact, even my friend Sally, her parents both had died from cancers as they were living in Hunters Point. And cancer was really not a big thing in Samoan Islands. Actually, there wasn't even a name for it. Yeah, many Samoans became ill after working at the Naval Shipyard. Many Samoan women, they attended nursing school in Samoan. My mother was one of them. All 5 of her sisters went to nursing school in the islands. And when they came to America, my mother worked at St. Joseph's Hospital, which is now a condominium up on Buena Vista Park. They worked at St. Luke's, the Jewish home on Silver and Mission was another place of employment many of my aunties worked at, and also the Kaiser hospitals. So there was a very big influx of Samoan women in the late 50s and early 60s that were nurses' aides. Just as we see now a lot of Filipino women and men who are now working in the medical field. When Samoans first arrived, that was, especially for the women, their go-to jobs were in the hospitals. And today, you will very rarely see a Samoan working in that field because I guess many of our young people don't feel they have to be nurses. But that was something that we all grew up with, where all our aunties were basically working in the hospitals, and they lived in Viz Valley, Hunters Point, and the surrounding areas here in District 10. Next one. Businesses we supported in Visitation Valley and surrounding communities. Of course, we talked about Bob Wong, the owner of El Rancho, and then who was the president of the Civic Association. And the reason why I bring that up a lot is because it's no longer around, but it was like it set the doors open for other Samoans to really try to engage in civic duties here in the Bay Area. A lot of Samoans are not involved if it's not to do with church. They'd rather do church than actual civic engagement without throughout their community because they always stay within their own village, being within their own churches. And Castle Lanes, as I mentioned before, Costa Bravo, the Cow Palace. We all grew up, many Samoans, because wrestling was a very big thing at the Cow Palace, and also roller derby, and many Samoans really enjoyed those sports. My grandfather would take at least 8 or 9 of his grandchildren, and he would sneak in tons of food under his coat, and we would just have hot dogs and barbecue chips and watch Peter Maivia, whose grandson is, of course, we all know, The Rock. And it was just a really big thing for us to go to the Cow Palace and to the boat shows and all that came along, which was just right next door to Viz Valley. Next
You
slide.
mean the actor Rock is actually from Visitation Valley?
So he was actually born here in San Francisco. That's why I kind of made that comment about the rock, the
Mm-hmm.
Visitation Valley
Sure.
rock. And my cousin Violetta and his mother are very good friends. They still talk today because they used to travel around wrestling. And Lecca said that Dwayne was always such a great kid, and he was very much destined to be something. And so he was very well known. The family was very well known when they lived here in San Francisco.
Was he a wrestler also in San Francisco? Is
No,
that how he started?
his grandfather was his grandfather and his father. So his father was Rocky Johnson, and his grandfather was talking chief Peter Maivia. And I guess that's where he got the influence of wrestling, which a lot of Samoans started to wrestle as well. There's the Onawai brothers. There's my
Mhm.
brother even went to Japan for 6 years to wrestle as a wrestler, and so it was something that before football came along, that a lot of Samoans were geared towards. But yeah, his family played a very big influence in the wrestling arena within the Pacific Islander community.
Hmm. I see. Wow. Interesting.
Next. So the biggest thing that happened to our Samoan community was a fire that happened on May 23rd in 1964. Approximately 250 persons were attending a fundraising entertainment event, is what they had called it, but in actuality it was also part of a wedding party that had gotten married
Mhm.
earlier in the day. And the knife dance is
Mhm.
something that is traditionally done at all Samoan events. It was the knife dance originally came from, it's called the Nifo'oti in Samoa, and of course they brought it here.
Mhm.
um, so the highlight of the evening, as it said in the article that I got this from, was the Samoan fire dance, while the performer was preparing his act in the wings by saturating a sword from an open pan of gasoline. The
Mhm.
gasoline was accidentally ignited, and someone backstage grabbed a pressurized water
Mhm.
extinguisher. And of course, when the stream of water hit the flames or pans, it just kind of splattered everywhere, and it started burning gasoline, and it on the walls, on the floors, on the people that my parents had talked to who did not attend that evening. Actually, several members of my family did not go in that evening. I was very young then. Um, there was chaos that kind of broke out because the fire spread like wildfire. All the exits were blocked because then they did not have laws that required exits to remain clear. And there was also no such thing as fire extinguishers throughout the building. There was nothing there. So it did cause panic.
Mhm.
And eventually, 17 people lost their lives in that fire.
Uh-huh.
And my aunt, who got married that day, her husband also passed away from running back into the building to save a young boy by the name of George Cassidy. Um, and the young boy survived. Her husband passed away that day on May 23rd, 1964, which
How
is the
tragic.
day, yeah, which was the day they got married. So My aunt just recently passed away about 6 years ago, but she did remarry after this fire. Many of the Samoans that attended the fire, a lawsuit was also brought about through the Catholic Church because of a lot of the safety issues that went on, and many Samoans received compensation for their burns. Many of them were 80 to 90% burned on their bodies. And the sad thing about that is that many of the Samoans were able to purchase homes after that, which they did. And today, a lot of those homes are no longer around because of the last time we had. Um, a lot of them sort of refinanced their homes and they lost them during, I think it was the 90s. Um, and I don't know of any of the Samoans who had bought in homes, which might have been about 50 or 60 families who bought new homes. I don't think they have them today. And which is kind of sad too, because that was probably their only opportunity to afford housing then. But the fire, when I started to work for the Cathedral Hill Hotel, which another fire had happened there, it was mentioned that the reason why that fire was so easily contained because of what happened at this fire here. New laws were put in place to where f- um, overhead fire extinguishers were put in place. Hotels were now required whenever there's an event to go on that none of the exits should be chained or locked. So in vain, this fire kind of set some codes and safety procedures in San Francisco, but 17 lives were lost during that time. And I remember it as a kid. It was just, you could just hear our community just talk about it. And I think that was the largest loss of life then in the 60s because of this fire. Next slide. Today, there are organizations in Viz Valley. We have the Samoan Community Development Center, which I worked for 5 years. The executive director is Patsy Tito. I was in charge of their Samoan Wellness Initiative. They've been the longest standing, almost 30 years in Viz Valley. They provide services as after school programs, senior programs. They deliver culturally appropriate foods to our seniors and to other minorities within Viz Valley. Then we have Samoan Solution, which is run by Epi and Fanga. They're actually located in South City, but they do a lot of work. They predominantly supply small little scholarships for children, I mean, for young people and for college people, high school kids who are going into college. And there's their contact there. That's Samoan Solutions, and also the Pacific Islander Task Force, the PI Task Force, which is multicultural, multi community. So they have us here in Viz Valley, also in the Oakland area, Alameda County, and it's about 20 members strong. And they do a lot of food distribution in all of the counties, including Viz Valley. And then we have Utopia, which is the organization that I helped co-found, which was the very first LGBTQ Pacific Islander groups that we've been around for almost 30 years as well. But our most successful children are Utopia Washington, Utopia. They employ about 20 people. They're a nonprofit. They do COVID testing and also supply the Pacific Islander community up in Seattle all the necessarily needs that they need as far as housing. So they're pretty large, and also in San Diego, Hawaii, and in Portland, Oregon. So those are organizations that are thriving, whereas we're just kind of laying low here in San Francisco. Next, and I think that's it. Next slide, if there is.
That is it.
That is it. So there's a lot more that the Samoan community has been through in San Francisco, but the exodus is real. Many of our communities have started to move out to Modesto, to the East Bay, and because of what's happening with all the rebuilding of Sunnydale and you'll see a lot of Samoan families have just left, and they can't afford to stay here anymore. So
Mhm. Well, where would you say, I think you mentioned it before, but I think where are the largest concentrations of the Samoan population in the US?
probably in SoCal, in Southern California.
Mhm.
In the actual island of American Samoa, there's 75,000
Mhm.
tops, whereas in SoCal it's about 200,000. You know,
Wow, wait a
yeah,
minute. There's 75,000 on the island itself.
just on American Samoa, but
American, right.
in the other Samoa, which is an independent country, is
Okay.
about 300,000.
Oh, it's so much bigger. I see it.
It's huge compared to American Samoa, and that's why I always questioned as a kid, why would America want that small piece of island which inhabits about 70,000 people? But it makes sense. It's got a very deep harbor where
Mhm.
fueling stations can come in. It was during the wartime,
I see.
and to this day, you can see a lot of bunkers that were built in American Samoa around the island because of the wars that were going on back in the 40s.
Well, is the population declining in America and Samoa?
You know what's so funny? I was there in 2018,
Mhm.
and it only takes about an hour to go from one end to the other.
Mhm.
And there were so many abandoned homes um, on the island. People just got up and left, and
Wow.
they're either here in California. A lot of them are in Seattle, Utah,
Mhm.
Modesto, but they just leave their houses because there's really nothing there. The tuna factories started to close down,
Mhm.
um, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why I want to go. I want to go back before, I don't know what happened, before we become a mini Hawaii,
Mhm.
because another thing that happened is one of my nephews goes to a private school. He's only about 7, and they're
Mhm.
not allowed to speak Samoan in the schools.
Oh,
Mhm.
They're only at home. So I told my niece to take me by the school, and she wouldn't. She just kept going. She goes, "Uncle, don't." And I go, I cannot believe that they're not allowed. They go,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the only way they'll learn is in school, not at home. And I go, but there are kids here that are trying to learn it and are signing up for classes,
Mhm.
and yet in the motherland they're not teaching it. So yeah, some of
Yeah,
the schools are not required to speak Samoan, which totally upsets me.
yeah, yeah, that is a sad
Yes,
situation.
and so it's, I mean, but it's a give and take. So now I'm hearing the borders are open now. We're allowed to go back in August. They'll have
Mhm.
2 flights a week in August, so I'm looking forward to that.
Wow. Is it becoming a tourist location? Some
No,
no, I see.
Samoa would never allow that. American Samoa would
Oh.
never allow that. But the other island is a very big tourist destination. They have 4 resorts on the island.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful island. I mean, tourists can go there and they can find a lot to do. Whereas in American Samoa, there is a national park,
Mhm.
which Americans, we can go, and there's this big old national park, but you have to go through certain villages to get there. And that's about it. And I think Manua is the only island or the only place in the world, which I read in Newsweek, that is solely dependent upon solar energy. There's
Wow.
yeah, they just put solar all over the island, and that's what they live on, is solar.
Okay.
So I think we're a test tube. The islands, they're testing a lot of things on us. Um, like I said, the population of 75,000 in Samoa. They have 2 McDonald's, one at each end of the island.
Mhm.
And of course there's not Jack in the Box, there's other fast foods there.
Mhm.
Samoans no longer go to the plantations. They just buy stuff from the stores, which
Mhm.
were predominantly owned by Asians and
Mhm.
Filipinos. I believe there's a large Filipino community there. And yeah, it's becoming like you hear of a lot of places, like the Samoan people will sooner or later not own anything. But churches are very big in Samoa.
Mhm.
Every night at 6 o'clock, a bell will ring without in each village, and you're required to stop what you're doing and at least pray for 10 minutes.
Wow.
So you can walk into anybody's house and just say, "Hi, it's prayer time," and they'll invite you in. You'll sit down and pray, and if you're walking in a village, somebody will pull you over and say, "Why aren't you praying?"
Really? Wow.
Because I'm from America, we don't pray. No. Um, so yeah, you just kind of
Not
you have to be
necessarily at 6 anyway.
right. You have to be mindful of those kind of things, and I think that's probably be the only issue I'll have if I ever decide to move back is all these churches.
Right. Do you find that many of your colleagues and friends in your generation want to go back and retire there?
Yes, but the thing is because of the language.
Ah,
Like I'm fluent, but not in the sense to where I can speak to elders properly. I can
mhm,
carry a conversation and get by, but I can't in front of in a ceremony. I wouldn't know how to address, a
mhm,
pastor or a high chief or. But yeah, many of us here, that's the biggest fear of going back and not knowing the language. But most of them want to go back before it's no longer an indigenous type of island, you know?
right. I mean, could most of the population survive on their own with the resources on the island, or uh, was it necessary to rely on like government support?
Oh no, they can. They very much can. But they choose not to anymore because we even have a welfare system,
Mhm,
courtesy of the United States. They get food stamps, and that was an uproar with the Samoan community. They're like, food stamps.
mhm.
What in the hell do we need food stamps? But it's money that's being allocated to the island, so of course they're going to utilize it,
Yes, yeah.
and so that just gives them the excuse not to grow anything.
Mhm,
But when the tuna factories, one of them, Starkist, closed down, 2,000 people became unemployed and they were forced to go back fishing, and a lot of them enjoyed it. They said they
mhm,
made more money selling fish by the road
mhm.
than working an hourly wage of $2.36 an hour.
Right, right.
So it kind of woke them up like, wow, we could make more money selling taro and bananas and fish
Mhm,
than working an 8-hour shift, shucking tuna and putting them in cans. So
mhm,
hopefully it'll give our community some sort of a wake up call because they can be self sufficient. They can be. But there's a lot of influence from China, Taiwan, the United States. And, everybody has a cell phone, everybody drives an SUV. I
mhm.
mean, it's crazy. The traffic is crazy because there's only one road. So it's just crazy.
Well, interesting. That's fantastic, Neil. I'm so glad that you did this presentation. I knew so little about the Samoan community and
Yeah.
their presence in San Francisco and Visitation Valley. Just to learn that Valley has such a rich
They
history.
do. I love Viz Valley. We should have a T-shirt made.
I
Do we
love
have
this
one,
valley.
Russell? Do we have one, Russell?
We can work on it. We can have it by the end of
Okay,
the summer.
there you go. We everything's
That's
opening up.
great.
Because even today, when I mention to people, "Oh, I'm in Visitation Valley," they're like, "I've never heard of it." I go, "Okay, we're right next to Bayview," and they're like, "Oh, I know Bayview, Hunters
Right.
Point." I go,
Mhm.
"Well, yeah, we're the ones that nobody knows. We're Viz Valley, Visitation Valley."
Well, I was looking at a map and I didn't realize that Bayview is at least 2 or 3 times geographically larger, right? I
Yeah, it's
mean,
huge.
at least by looking at the map, it seems so much larger.
And I'm sure Russell could tell you even more about, our district. I mean, Bayview had meat cutting plants. I remember as a kid out there, slaughterhouses that we
Mhm.
would drive through in a certain area and hold our noses because we knew what was coming up, right? It was right after the Coca-Cola
Mhm.
factory, and you would just start to smell the stench of cows and pigs and whatever. But nobody talks about those things anymore. We definitely need to let people know. We're a very vital community, and yet nobody knows who we are. But now they know Bayview because of all the development and how
Mhm.
pretty all the views are, and.
Soon the Bayview property's probably already spiking because they do have a view, right? They're
Well,
on
I didn't like it when they changed the name to Hunter's View. I was like, the
Hunter's
hell?
View. Oh, is
Yeah,
that really an actual name of the location?
it is.
Oh, goodness.
Hunter's View. Well, I don't know. Are they changing our name here in Sunnydale, Russell? I heard some
Well,
rumors.
there's been pushback. Sunnydale is the name, but there's like the new buildings. They're calling the new buildings by different names, and um, and this is kind of a good segue to what we'll talk about maybe in 2 weeks.
Mm,
Stage Lock, and everybody in the neighborhood who's been around, they call it the Stage Lock site, but
right.
now they're morphing that into a different name,
Oh,
Baylands
great.
North. So it is part of the history of the neighborhood, but it's also it's being developed and it's going to be something else. So I think you exactly hit the nail on the head that, we have to remember the past as we move toward the future.
Right, right. Well, also the different industries that have come and gone, whether it's the slaughterhouses, Coca-Cola, Stage Lock. I mean, there were masses of people employed in these businesses, and once they
Yes.
closed, there was, a flood of people who left, right? Because they had to look for employment. Mm.
Yeah, like Planner's Peanuts. I mean,
Oh, really? Planners was there too? Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
it's another U-Haul storage place, but when we were kids, we would see the big old Planner's Peanut, off the freeway. Same thing with
Mhm,
Folgers Coffee and just a lot of businesses who are no longer here. But
mhm.
I'm sounding like a really old person.
Oh, this is valuable information. Thank you so much for doing
No, thank
this.
you for inviting me to speak on it.
Right. Well, we've just got to get the word out because if we're, putting like quality, presentations and information like this, we want other people to hear it too.
Thank you.
We'll run the recording on another future date.
Yeah, to be aired at a later time.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So I don't think I have any new news, Russell, for Visitation Valley this week.
Yeah,
Um,
nothing major. So
Oh,
we'll be, oh,
just one thing. So the Samoan Community Development Center
Hmm.
at 2055 Sunnydale, they're now a drive-through vaccination site.
oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
every Saturday from 9:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. And
Wow.
I'll send everybody a link to the flyer.
Thank
Right.
you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I enjoy it actually coming together and
Thanks.
then getting this information. So we'll try to
When's our
do a better job.
when's our next meeting again?
Okay,
In
oh, that's
2 weeks?
maybe something we should discuss. Should we do it first and third of the month? Does that work for everybody? It's up to you guys too.
so
Um,
if it'll be, the next one would be the first.
June 1st.
Yeah. So as long as we lock it in so we can put the word out.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Okay.
that'll be cool. June 1st.
Okay. So once again, thank you very much. And we will see you all soon. And also let us know how we can get the word out too. And maybe it might, I know, Neil, you have a podcast. Maybe we may need to contact organizations directly and talk to them, right?
Yeah.
And say, and rather than just sending them an email, because they don't know who we are, or they don't maybe know all of what we're doing. And we're also evolving as well, right? Because we were doing it weekly, now we're doing it bi-weekly. So anyway, Opal, are you there?
Yeah, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.
Opal, maybe
Yes,
Opal.
I'm here.
So what do you think? I mean, how do you think this is something that the community would be interested? Hey,
Um, I think it was interesting. I wanted to hear it, but I was also with a client, so I couldn't
oh,
listen to the whole thing.
mhm,
But Neo, I'm very interested in the Samoan history
mhm,
because I've spent a lot of time I've spent a lot of time in Hawaii. And
Mhm.
so I feel like it's, the Pacific, the South Pacific is very different than the mainland. So that's why I tuned in, even though I couldn't give it my full attention. Yes, but I would try to come and meet again with you.
So,
Thank you.
thank you,
Mhm.
Opal.
Yeah.
Okay, I think if no one else has anything else, we're done.
Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.